Let's look at an example of notes payable. Greenwald Company, a vacuum manufacturer, borrowed $7 million cash on November 1st, 2018 to provide working capital for year-end production. Blanton issued a 4-month, 15% promissory note to Brant Bank under a prearranged short-term line of credit. Interest on the note is payable at maturity. Each firm's fiscal year is the calendar year. Number 1 says prepare the journal entries to record A, the issuance of the note by Greenwald, in other words, the borrowing company, and B, Brant Bank's receivable on November 1st, 2018. So we're going to look at both of these individuals. Even though this unit really focuses on the payable, let's look at both sides so you can just see how a note treats both the borrower and the issuer, the lender. All right. So first and foremost, when we borrow those funds, we're going to get cash. So Greenwald's going to receive cash, and they're going to receive cash of $7 million. So we're going to go in and we're going to put $7 million. Then we're going to turn around and we're going to do notes payable because it's a borrowed fund, so we have to put in there the amount that they're actually borrowing. Now, Brant Bank would be just the opposite. They're actually lending the money, so instead of a payable on their books, they will have a receivable of that same $7 million. And then we would go in, and of course they're lending cash, so their cash is going to go down with a credit for $7 million. That's the beginning of a note. Now, this is not an installment note. It's just a general note payable, which means principal and interest will be due at maturity. In other words, 4 months later. So we do not have to worry about making monthly payments on this note. So what happens? Well, keep in mind when we cross the year end, we have to remember that we have to accrue revenues in the proper time or expenses in the proper time period. So let's start with Greenwald, the borrowing company. So on December 31st, what Greenwald would have to do is they would have to accrue the interest expense. So on a payable, you're going to record interest expense. We're not going to pay it until maturity, so it's going to go in as an interest payable. Now, how do we calculate the interest expense? Well, to calculate interest, I like to use the formula called PERT, P-R-T, or principal times rate times time. So in this problem, that would be a principal of $7 million times a rate of 15%. Oops, there we go, 0.15, and times time. How much time has passed from the start of this note until this point? And in looking at it, it started on November 1st, so let's scroll back up, November 1st, and it is now December 31st, so we're talking 2 months. So we do 2 out of 12. So pull out your calculators, just a moment there, and let's see how to calculate that interest. So we're going to take $7 million, and we're going to multiply that by the 15%, and then multiply it by 2 divided by 12. And when we do that, you'll notice that you get an interest amount of $175,000 that would have accrued. So there we go. We debit interest expense, credit interest payable. Now, sticking with Greenwald Company, let's look at the March 1st maturity. When a note matures, we actually are going to pay it back. So we know cash is going to go down. But what are we paying back? Well, one, we have to pay back the interest payable that we just accrued, the $175 for last period. Then, did any additional interest accrue in this period, which would be the current year? Well, the answer would be yes. Remember, it was a four-month note. We accrued 2 months of the interest last period, so that means we still need to accrue 2 more. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit interest expense as well for the additional 2 months. And a way to check that, it was a 4-month note, so take your $7 million times the 15%. That gives you $1,050,000 in interest per year. Then multiply that by 4/12. What 4/12 would be is 4 months out of 12, because interest is always expressed in annual terms. When you do that, you'll notice the full interest that we would pay on this note is $350,000. Then that $350,000 is broken down between prior year, 2 months or half, and current year, the other half. So that's where we get that total of $350,000 in interest. Then we also have to get rid of the notes payable because we're physically paying off the original $7 million note. Now, the last thing we have to show is that we're actually writing a check to Brant Bank for $7,350,000, or the maturity value of the note. which is the total principal on the note, $7 million, plus the total interest on the note of $350,000. All right, so now, since it asked us to do it, again, this video we're really focused on debt or liabilities here, but it does ask us to do break bank. So let's look at the same two entries for break bank for that same period. Now, the dollar amounts are going to be identical. The only difference is, instead of them having a payable on their books, they have a receivable. So instead of interest expense and interest payable, we're going to do interest receivable and interest revenue. Again, the dollar amount is the same, we're just flipping sides, because for our expense as Greenwald Company, they're going to have a revenue as the bank, because they get to receive that interest. Then on March 1st, again, it's very similar, but instead of paying cash, bank is going to receive the cash. And again, they're going to receive the maturity value, which is the total principal plus the total interest. So we're going to go in and hit for $7,350,000. Now, what's comprising that? Well, one, again, is the interest receivable that we've already recorded, $175,000. Then we're going to hit the interest revenue for the current year's amount, $175,000. And then the last thing we have to show is that they are paying off, or they're receiving, we're paying because we're Greenwald, but they're receiving the note, so we have to get rid of the balance in notes receivable because they no longer owe us that $7 million balance. So in this example, you sort of see both sides of the transaction. You get to see Greenwald on top here, which is the borrowing firm, and Break Bank, which is the lending firm. Now let's look at the next part of this problem. It says, suppose the face amount of the note was adjusted to include interest, the non-interest bearing note. In other words, there's really no such thing as non-interest bearing. It's simply embedded in the original amount. So what we're going to do is discount this note, and the bank's discount rate is 15%. Prepare the journal entry to record the issue of the non-interest bearing note by Greenwald Company. So we're only going to look at Greenwald in this case. We're not going to look at both sides. We're going to focus in on that non-interest bearing note for Greenwald. So on November 1st, the first thing we have to do is Greenwald still borrowed cash. Okay, so we're going to put the cash on. Now, the thing here, we need to find how much they're discounting this note by, because anytime you have a non-interest bearing discounted note, you're going to go in and you're going to have to hit discount on notes payable. Now, the way that we would calculate the discount on this note payable is we would take the full $7 million and we would again multiply it by the interest rate, 15%, and then multiply it by the total life of the bond, which is 4 out of 12 months. And when you do that, surprisingly enough, we've already done that, we know that it is $350,000. So we're going to go in and we're going to get the discount for $350,000. Now, when a discounted note is recorded, we still record the notes payable at the actual face, or $7 million in this account. Oops, I missed a zero, so let's fix that. We're going to hit it for $7 million. Now, the cash difference would be $6,550,000. That's the amount of cash. So notice we have a discounted amount. Even though we have to pay back $7 million, we've discounted back for the interest that would have accrued and went ahead and taken it out on the top of the note. So we only received $6,550,000. Now let's look at the same thing, the adjusting entry at December 31st and the entries required at maturity. Now, interest has already been taken into account because it's already embedded in the cash we received up top. So when we recognize interest expense, we do not have to record the additional payable. What we do is we go in and we hit the interest expense. Again, we've already calculated this. It would be 2 months worth of interest per the top part there that we did. So we know it's $175,000 between November 1st and December 31st. Then we don't want to hit the payable. We're simply going to remove it from the discount on notes payable that we have recorded. We've already taken into account the interest up here when we took it out of the price. So as we recognize the interest, we simply amortize, so to speak, that discount on the note over the life. Then on March 1st, what's going to happen? Well, the first thing before we actually pay off the note is we need to then realize that the rest of that discount is being amortized as well. The reason being is we cannot pay off the note payable without bringing the balance up. So you can do it in one entry, but I like to do it in two so that you see. The note payable now is a full $7 million because we would carry it at the discounted rate. So when the note first went on our books, we would show $6,550,000 as debt on our balance sheet because these two would be netted to show the total value of the note or the carry value. Then as we amortize that discount over the life, what we're doing is we're bringing the carry value of our note up to this full $7 million. And the reason being is that's the amount we actually have to pay off at the maturity of the note. So we're going to go in on maturity date, and we're going to hit the note payable for the full 7, and we're going to pay it out in cash for 7. Now, even though the discounted rate is 7% on this note, that is not the effective rate. By discounting it out, we're actually ending up paying, in theory, a slightly higher rate, or what we would call the effective interest rate. Now, to find that, what we do is we first take the discount on the note. I'm going to put MP if that's okay. That was $350,000. Then we're going to divide it by the net proceeds. Remember, we didn't get $7 million for this. We got $6,550,000. And when we do that, now you're going to get a long decimal, so leave it in your calculator. I'm going to type it here, 0.052631578.9. Again, leave that full string in your calculator. That is not an annual rate of interest, so it's not 5% per year. That is simply the interest rate for the 4 months. So now we need to bring that up to a full period of time. So if it's a 4-month note out of 12 months, so what we would need to do is multiply this by 12 out of 4, okay, or times it by 3, because notice every 4 months we would need to times that by 3 to get a full 12 months out of the deal here. And so we're going to go in, when we multiply that out, we get 15.79 rounded percent. So notice, even though it's a 15% discounted rate, the effective rate, the amount of interest we're paying based on the funds that we actually borrowed, $6,500,000, is 15.79 effective interest rate.